I told my girlfriend to put more effort into her appearance. Now she spends hours putting on makeup and I'm the bad guy. At first, it seemed like the perfect suggestion. No more dirty clothes at the family reunions. No more Crocs at my corporate work events. But by week 2, something felt off. Suddenly, my sweet girl didn't want to go near me anymore. "This foundation took an hour to blend and your hands will leave marks," she'd say. Within days, the contrast became obvious. She looked polished, expensive, untouchable. I looked wrinkled from sleeping on the couch to not disturb her hair. We didn't match anymore. That's when I started to disappear. Waiters would take Eliana's order and walk away, forcing me to call them back. At my own birthday dinner, the server handed her the check without even looking at me. Like I was her teenage son she was treating to dinner. The worst part was Eliana was too busy checking her reflection in every surface to notice. My brother Jimbo stopped by that weekend to return my jacket. He didn't even try to hide his gaze that was locked on Eliana like she was the only person in the room. "Wow, Eliana, you look incredible." "Thank you," she said. "Your brother explained I was embarrassing him. I'm trying to do better." Jimbo's face changed instantly. He looked at me with calculation, then back at her. "Embarrassing? That's what he said?" "Jimbo," I started. "Well, you're definitely not embarrassing now," he said slowly, staring like he was trying to memorize what her body looked like. That night I couldn't sleep. Eliana was in the bathroom for 2 hours, and I could hear her whispering to herself in the mirror. "You're so ugly. He probably wishes you looked like the waitress in the restaurant." She sounded broken. "Eliana? You okay?" The crying stopped instantly. "Fine. Just my skincare routine." I wanted to comfort her, but she wouldn't let me close enough to touch. Jimbo started appearing everywhere. "I'll take her to that nail appointment. You're working anyway." Then it was coffee after. Then lunch. He knew more about her schedule than I did. By month 2, he was taking her to appointments, to lunches, to my own mother's house. Eliana told me she cries every night, Mom said at Sunday dinner, voice cold. Jimbo brought her by and she just broke down sobbing about not being pretty enough for you. I wanted to scream that I never asked for this level of insanity, but Eliana was right there welling up with tears, and Jimbo had his arm around her shoulders, comforting. I looked like the asshole brother-in-law. 3 months in, I was losing my mind. Jimbo practically lived at our house. They had their own language about beauty routines, their own jokes, their own world that I wasn't part of. That night I cornered Jimbo in the parking lot. "What the fuck are you doing?" "Helping your girlfriend. Someone has to. Stay away from her." He laughed. "Or what? You'll complain about that too? Tell Eliana her appointments are inconvenient? Make her cry more?" I shoved him. "Touch me again, and I'll tell Eliana you're getting violent about her appearance. See how that goes." I was trapped. Any move I made would make me look worse. The breaking point came after another 4-hour wait for a dinner we missed entirely. "This is insane!" I exploded. Eliana started sobbing immediately. "I'm doing what you wanted, but I know it's not enough. I'll never be pretty enough. Just stop. Go back to normal." "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stop trying." Eliana showed up looking completely wrong, not just casual, but deliberately awful. Hair that looked wet with grease, a shirt with actual food stains, dirt under her nails that hadn't been there this morning. Jimbo stood up so fast his chair fell over. "What did you do?" Not asking her. Asking me. He dragged me to the hallway, and the mask finally dropped completely. "I've been waiting for you to mess this up." Holding her while she cried. Telling her she's perfect while you made her feel like crap. "You've been playing the long game?" His smile was cold. "Since the day you brought her home, I've been waiting, and you finally gave me my opening." Back in the dining room, he pulled Eliana against his chest. "You're perfect," he said, loud enough for everyone. "My brother's an idiot." She looked up at him with those tears. "You really think so?" "I've known so since day 1. They left together. Jimbo's arm around her waist, claiming what he'd been circling for months. I had to get her back. The morning light came through the apartment windows too bright, and I couldn't remember falling asleep on the couch. Her makeup brushes sat scattered across the bathroom counter like she'd just stepped away for a minute. I kept waiting to hear her voice through the door doing that whisper thing where she told herself she wasn't pretty enough. The silence felt wrong in a way that made my chest hurt. I grabbed my phone and typed out, "We need to talk," before I could think about it. The message showed delivered, but I knew Jimbo probably had her phone by now. 2 days went by and nothing. I called her number maybe 20 times, and it went straight to voicemail every single time. That's when I checked social media and found out she'd blocked me on everything. Facebook, Instagram, even LinkedIn, which seemed crazy, because we never used that anyway. Jimbo's page was still public, though. and he'd posted 3 photos of them at brunch that morning. She looked happy in the pictures, smiling at him across the table with her hair perfect and her makeup done just right. The erasure felt planned out and complete, like they'd talked about exactly how to remove me from her life. At work on Monday, my colleague Will pulled me aside during lunch and asked if I was okay. I told him it was just a bad breakup and tried to brush it off, but he didn't buy it. He said I looked like someone who hadn't slept in days, and he wasn't wrong. His concern made me uncomfortable because I was supposed to be the guy who had everything together. That afternoon, I tried checking Jimbo's Instagram again and discovered he'd blocked me too. They'd coordinated this whole thing together, which meant they'd sat down and talked about cutting me out. The realization made my chest feel tight and weird. I'd been completely removed from her life in 48 hours, like I never mattered at all. Late that night, around 2 in the morning, I opened my notes app and started writing out this long apology text. I explained how I never meant for things to go this far, and I just wanted her to feel confident about herself. I read it over maybe a dozen times and kept catching all the ways I was still making excuses and trying to control how she saw the whole situation. The draft sat there in my phone, but I couldn't send it because something about it felt wrong and selfish. End of the first week, I drove to our old apartment to pick up my stuff since the lease was in my name. Jimbo was there packing up Eliana's things into boxes. He blocked the doorway when I tried to come in and said she didn't want to see me. He talked like he was her manager now or something. I forced myself to stay calm and just grabbed my boxes from the living room without saying anything back to him. While I was loading my car in the parking lot, I heard Jimbo on his phone telling someone I'd been harassing Eliana and he was worried I might get violent. The lie came out so smooth and practiced that I realized he'd been building this story for a while now. I pulled out my phone and started recording the last part before he noticed me standing there. He walked away fast after that. 2 days later, Mom called and asked if I was okay in that tone that meant she'd already decided I wasn't. She said Eliana broke down crying at Sunday dinner about how scared she was of me. When I tried to explain my side of things, Mom cut me off and said Jimbo had been nothing but supportive and I should be grateful he was taking care of my mess. The words felt rehearsed, like she was reading from a script Jimbo had written. I drove to Eliana's salon the next day because I needed to see with my own eyes that she was okay. A stylist stopped me at the door before I could go inside. Her name tag said Sophia, and she was professional but firm about it. She explained that showing up without calling first would only make things worse and scare Eliana more. The way she said it felt protective of Eliana instead of mean to me, and that actually got through somehow. I walked back to my car and sat there in the parking lot for over an hour. Eliana came out of the salon later with Jimbo right behind her, so close he was almost touching her back. She looked smaller than I remembered, hunched over and checking her phone every few seconds, while he guided her to his car with his hand hovering near her waist. I wanted to run over there and ask if she was really okay, but Sophia's warning stopped me. So I just sat there in my car feeling completely useless while they drove away together. The following weekend, I had to show up at this work event for our biggest client, and I couldn't get out of it no matter how much I wanted to stay home. I got there around 7 and immediately started drinking, because being around people making small talk felt impossible when my brain wouldn't stop replaying Eliana's face in the parking lot. By 10, I'd lost count of how many drinks I'd had, and everything felt fuzzy and wrong. Around midnight, I pulled out my phone and started texting Eliana, even though I knew it was a terrible idea. I told her Jimbo was manipulating her, and she needed to see what he was really doing. I said he'd been planning this for months and using her pain against her. The texts kept coming, and I couldn't stop myself from typing out everything I'd been thinking for weeks. I woke up the next morning on my couch, still wearing my work clothes with my phone dead on the floor. Will had texted me screenshots of everything I'd sent, and the messages looked so much worse in the daylight. I wanted to throw my phone across the room and pretend it never happened. Will showed up at my apartment around 9 with coffee from the place down the street. He didn't say anything about the texts at first, just handed me the cup and sat down on the other end of the couch. Then he told me I needed to talk to someone professional before this got any worse. I started to brush him off, but he cut me off and said he was serious. He offered me his couch if I needed to get out of this apartment for a while because staying here clearly wasn't helping. Then he mentioned his sister went through something similar with an ex who messed with her head, and therapy was the only thing that helped her stop the spiral. The kindness in his offer hit me harder than I expected, because I hadn't realized how completely alone I'd been feeling until someone actually showed up. That afternoon, I sat at my laptop and searched for therapists in my area who took my insurance. Most of them had wait lists that were weeks or months out, but I found someone named Mara Dobson, who had an opening the following Tuesday. I stared at the booking page for probably 20 minutes before I finally clicked confirm. Committing to the appointment felt like admitting out loud that I was the problem in all of this. My stomach turned just thinking about having to explain everything to a stranger, but I was desperate enough to try anything at this point because what I'd been doing clearly wasn't working. The first therapy session was way harder than I expected. Mara's office was small and plain, with one of those generic nature posters on the wall. She asked me to explain why I was there, and I gave her the short version about the breakup and my brother. But she immediately zeroed in on my original comment about Eliana's appearance and asked me to unpack why I felt entitled to police how she looked. I got defensive right away and explained I just wanted her to make a good impression at family events and work functions. Mara kept pushing back on that and asking whose impression mattered and why I thought my comfort was more important than her autonomy. By the end of the hour, I felt completely drained from examining my own control issues. She gave me homework to think about other times I'd tried to manage how people saw me through controlling others. That night, I opened a new text message to Eliana and forced myself to write something short. I took responsibility for the appearance comment and how it hurt her without making any excuses or asking for anything back. I didn't mention Jimbo or try to explain my side of what happened after. Just 3 sentences saying I was sorry and I understood the damage I caused. I read it over probably 50 times looking for any part that sounded manipulative or self-serving. Then I sent it before I could overthink it anymore and immediately turned off my phone because I couldn't handle watching for a response. The vulnerability felt absolutely terrifying, but also like the first honest thing I'd done in weeks. Mom called 2 days later and left a voicemail inviting me to family lunch on Sunday, where Jimbo and Eliana would both be there. She framed it as a chance to clear the air and move forward like we were all adults. I called her back and declined as calmly as I could. I explained I needed space right now, and showing up would just create drama that nobody actually needed. She sounded disappointed and suggested I was being stubborn and making things harder than they had to be. But I held firm on the boundary, even though saying no to her felt wrong somehow. She said she hoped I'd reconsider and hung up. Going through old credit card statements that week, I found charges for hundreds of dollars in makeup and salon treatments from when Eliana was spiraling. There were receipts from 3 different salons and a makeup store I'd never even heard of. I thought about forwarding them to her as proof of how extreme things had gotten and how unhealthy the whole situation was. But Mara's voice played in my head, reminding me that would be using information as a weapon instead of actually helping. I saved the statements in a folder on my desktop and closed the window. Sophia texted me completely out of nowhere saying someone had been waiting outside the salon watching for Eliana. She was pretty sure it was my brother based on the car. The message included a photo of Jimbo's black sedan parked across the street, and Sophia said this was the 3rd day in a row she'd seen it there. My protective instinct kicked in so hard I almost got in my car right then, but I forced myself to sit down and think before reacting, because showing up would just make everything worse. I texted Sophia back thanking her for letting me know and asked her to please tell me if she saw anything else concerning. In my next therapy session, I told Mara about the first time I criticized Eliana's appearance at a family barbecue. She asked me to describe it out loud in detail, and I started recording myself on my phone while I talked. I explained how Eliana had shown up in old jeans and a t-shirt with a stain on it, and how everyone was dressed nice. I told her exactly what I said about how she needed to put more effort in, and how her face changed when I said it. Speaking the words out loud made me hear how cruel they sounded, even though at the time I thought I was being helpful. Mara asked if I'd want someone to say something like that to me, and I didn't have any good answer. The recording sat on my phone, and I couldn't bring myself to delete it. I texted Sophia, asking if she'd be willing to give Eliana a sealed letter from me one time only, with no expectation of any response. She agreed, but warned me it better be a real apology, without any manipulation or guilt-tripping, or she'd throw it away herself before Eliana ever saw it. I spent 2 days writing and rewriting 3 paragraphs. Every version sounded wrong or selfish or like I was trying to get something from her. Finally, I just wrote that I was sorry for what I said and how it hurt her, and I understood completely if she never wanted to talk to me again. I sealed it in an envelope and dropped it off at the salon the next morning before I could change my mind. 3 nights after that, my phone lit up at 2 a.m. with a voice note from Eliana. I grabbed it so fast I almost dropped it on the floor. Her voice came through shaky and quiet, like she was trying not to wake someone up in the next room. She said she needed space to figure out what she actually wanted, because everything felt confusing, and she didn't know who to trust anymore. The message lasted maybe 30 seconds, before it just cut off mid-sentence, like someone walked in, or she heard something that made her stop recording. I played it back 5 times trying to hear background noises or figure out where she was calling from. She never mentioned Jimbo once in the whole thing. The next morning, I texted Will asking if his offer about the spare room was still open because I couldn't stay in that apartment anymore. He replied within minutes, saying to come by whenever I was ready. Packing my stuff into boxes felt like admitting I'd lost, like I was giving up on getting her back. But Will showed up with his truck and helped me load everything, and he pointed out that staying in that place was just keeping me stuck in the same obsessive loops. His place was smaller, just a basic 2-bedroom with a couch that had seen better days, but the change of environment helped somehow. That first night, I actually slept for more than 3 hours straight, which hadn't happened in weeks. I woke up on Will's air mattress feeling slightly less crazy than I had in my own bed. 2 days into staying there, a text came through from Jimbo's number that just said, "Leave her alone or we'll get a restraining order." I took a screenshot immediately and saved it in a folder on my phone, noticing how the threatening tone was completely different from his concerned brother act he put on for everyone else. Will saw my face change when I read it and asked what happened. I showed him the message, and he suggested I should start keeping records of everything Jimbo sent me, just in case things got worse. He pulled up a notes app on his phone and helped me start a timeline of all the threats and weird behavior. Later that week, I borrowed a friend's social media login because I was still blocked on everything. Scrolling through, I found a family photo from Sunday dinner with Jimbo's arm wrapped around Eliana's shoulders and Mom beaming at both of them like they were the perfect couple. The caption talked about welcoming new family and grateful for the people who show up when it matters. I was completely cropped out of the whole narrative like I never existed at all. The replacement felt visceral and final, like they'd already rewritten history without me in it. I logged out and deleted the browser history because looking at it again would just make things worse. My next therapy session with Mara focused on creating a specific boundaries plan that we wrote down on actual paper. It included no unannounced visits to anywhere Eliana might be, no drunk communication of any kind, and no using other people to get information about what she was doing. Mara made me write out what healthy distance looked like versus obsessive monitoring, and we spent an hour going through examples of each. The structure felt both restrictive and weirdly relieving, like having clear rules meant I couldn't mess up as badly. I folded the paper and kept it in my wallet so I could look at it when I felt like breaking the boundaries. At the gym 3 days later, I ran into Raj on the treadmills, and he mentioned he'd seen Jimbo at Eliana's workplace multiple times recently. Apparently, Jimbo had been telling her co-workers I was abusive and controlling, spreading stories about how I'd made her life miserable. The gossip campaign made my blood boil, but I just thanked Raj for giving me the heads up. He looked uncomfortable and added that most people seemed pretty skeptical of Jimbo's stories because they actually knew Eliana and had seen us together before. I finished my workout and left before I could say something I'd regret. That afternoon, I texted Mom asking if we could have a one-on-one conversation to share my perspective without Jimbo being there to control the narrative. She didn't respond for 2 whole days, and when she finally did, the message said she didn't want to get in the middle of brother drama, and I needed to work it out with Jimbo directly. The stonewalling confirmed what I already suspected, that she'd already chosen sides and nothing I said would change her mind. I showed Will the text, and he just shook his head, saying some parents can't see past their favorite kid, no matter what evidence you show them. The following Monday, HR called me into a meeting about the work event from a few weeks back. Someone had reported smelling alcohol on me the next day when I came into the office. I got a formal warning added to my file and a requirement to confirm in writing that I didn't have a substance problem. The professional consequence hit harder than I expected because it meant my mistakes were following me into work now, not just my personal life. I signed the paperwork and walked back to my desk, feeling like everything was falling apart at once. That night, I made the decision to cut out alcohol completely, not as some grand gesture to prove anything, but because I literally couldn't afford any more mistakes. The first few days were harder than I expected because I'd been using drinks to numb the constant anxiety that sat in my chest. Will noticed when I turned down beer after work and started suggesting other activities when I looked like I was about to crack, like going to the gym or watching movies at his place. Having someone actually pay attention to when I was struggling helped more than I wanted to admit. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. A week into staying sober, Sophia sent me a screenshot that made my stomach drop. It showed a text conversation where Jimbo had asked her to report back on Eliana's schedule and mood, and he'd offered to pay her for the information. The manipulation was right there in writing, exactly what I'd suspected about his surveillance, but now I had actual proof. Sophia added a message saying she'd told him to back off, and she was getting worried about Eliana's safety with how controlling he was being. I saved the screenshot in the same folder as everything else, watching the evidence pile up, even though I didn't know what I'd ever do with it. I called Sophia the next morning and told her she could show Eliana the screenshot of Jimbo asking for information about her schedule. The words felt wrong coming out because every instinct wanted me to be the one fixing this, but Mara's voice in my head reminded me that inserting myself would just push Eliana further away. Sophia was quiet for a second before saying she'd find the right time to bring it up without making Eliana feel attacked or overwhelmed. I thanked her and hung up, feeling like I'd just handed over the last bit of control I had left. 3 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Eliana's number, and my hands started shaking before I even read it. The message was formal and careful, asking if I could meet her once to return some belongings at a public place with a friend nearby for safety. The boundaries in her words showed she was protecting herself from me, which stung, but also felt deserved. I texted back immediately suggesting a cafe downtown with outdoor seating so she'd feel safe and visible. She sent a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else. My therapy session the day before the meeting turned into 2 hours of Mara helping me write out an actual apology without excuses or deflection. We practiced different scenarios, including what I'd do if Eliana got angry or if Jimbo showed up trying to cause problems. Mara made me repeat the apology script until it sounded natural instead of rehearsed, and she warned me not to expect forgiveness or reconciliation from this conversation. The preparation made my anxiety worse, but also gave me something concrete to hold on to, so I wouldn't mess this up. I showed up at the cafe 15 minutes early and picked a table where Eliana could see me from the parking lot. When she walked up, she looked completely exhausted with red patches all over her face from washing too much and layers of makeup trying to cover the damage. I stood up and started with the apology I'd practiced, telling her I was wrong to criticize her appearance, and I understood now how much damage that comment caused. She sat down and started crying immediately, telling me about body image issues from her childhood that I never knew existed because I'd never bothered to ask. Her mom used to compare her to her prettier cousins at every family event, and she spent her whole teenage years feeling ugly and invisible. The conversation felt more real and raw than anything we'd managed in our entire relationship before everything fell apart. I noticed her hands were completely destroyed from constant washing, all chapped and cracked with her nails bitten down to nothing but ragged edges. Instead of trying to fix it or tell her what to do, I just mentioned there were therapists who worked specifically with body-focused behaviors if she ever wanted resources. She looked surprised and asked if I was going to tell her to stop or criticize how bad her hands looked. I said no. I was just offering information if she wanted it, and the choice was completely hers. We sat there for another 20 minutes talking about how things spiraled and what we both could have done differently. Then Jimbo appeared out of nowhere, walking fast toward our table and asking loudly if I was harassing her. He demanded she leave with him right now and tried to grab her arm to pull her up from the chair. The cafe staff came over immediately when they saw him grabbing at her and asked if everything was okay. Eliana shot me this apologetic look and left with Jimbo while he kept his hand on her back, steering her toward his car. Every instinct in my body screamed to follow them or intervene, but I stayed in my seat and watched them drive away. That night, I wrote Mom a calm email laying out my boundaries, including no more family events with Jimbo present until things settled down. I didn't blame her or demand she pick sides, just explained what I needed for my own mental health and well-being. Hitting send felt like closing a door that had been open too long. Around 1 a.m, my phone rang with Eliana's number, and I answered to hear her sobbing before the line went completely dead. I wanted to call back or drive over to wherever she was, but I forced myself to respect her earlier request for space and boundaries. The restraint felt like actual torture, but also like the first real growth I'd managed in months. Over the next week, I got removed from shared streaming accounts and kicked out of group chats with mutual friends who'd clearly chosen Team Jimbo in this whole mess. I accepted each loss without fighting it or trying to defend myself, because Mara had warned me that protesting would just make me look worse. The isolation hurt, but it also felt clarifying, like I was finally seeing who actually cared versus who just liked drama. A voicemail came through at 3 a.m. from Jimbo's number, and he was clearly drunk, threatening that if I contacted Eliana again, he'd make me regret it in graphic terms that made my skin crawl. I saved the recording immediately and texted Will asking if he thought this was worth reporting to police. He responded within minutes, saying to document everything carefully, but wait unless things escalated further, because a single voicemail probably wouldn't get much action from cops. The next morning, I saved the voicemail in 3 different places, including cloud storage and a backup drive. My therapy appointment was that afternoon, and I brought my phone with the recording ready to play. Mara listened to the whole thing without interrupting while I sat there feeling my face get hot with anger all over again. She asked if I wanted to explore legal options like filing a police report for harassment or getting a restraining order. We talked through both paths and what they would actually accomplish versus the energy they would cost me. I decided to keep documenting everything carefully, but not escalate to police unless Jimbo actually did something beyond threats. The choice felt more controlled than just reacting out of emotion. Mara nodded and said, "Sometimes the most powerful response is measured restraint instead of giving someone the reaction they want." Walking out of her office, I felt steadier than I had in days. I stopped at the grocery store on the way home and ran into Raj in the produce section. He looked uncomfortable the second he saw me, and I could tell he had information he wasn't sure about sharing. He mentioned Eliana missed 3 full days at work last week because of panic attacks, and her boss was starting to get worried about her reliability. The news hit me hard, but I just thanked him for letting me know. Every protective instinct in my body wanted to call her or show up at her work to make sure she was okay. Instead, I went home and texted Will about it because I needed to tell someone. He responded within minutes, reminding me that inserting myself into her life right now would only make things worse for her, even if my intentions were good. I hated how right he was. 2 days later, Sophia sent me a long text explaining she set up a mediated phone call between me and Eliana with specific ground rules. No yelling, no ambushing with emotional manipulation, no bringing up Jimbo unless Eliana mentioned him first. Eliana agreed to the call because she wanted closure on some practical stuff, like shared accounts and belongings still at the apartment. I was nervous about screwing it up, but grateful someone was creating structure around this. Sophia sent the call time and said she would be on the line too as a neutral third party to make sure both of us stayed calm. The day of the call, I sat at my kitchen table 15 minutes early with notes written out about what I wanted to say. Sophia connected us at exactly the scheduled time, and Eliana's voice sounded small and tired. We got through the practical stuff first about canceling the shared streaming services and who was keeping which furniture. Then she mentioned almost casually that Jimbo has her location shared at all times on her phone, and he calls if she's somewhere unexpected for more than an hour. The way she described this constant tracking made my skin feel wrong and cold. I kept my voice careful and calm while suggesting that level of watching wasn't normal or healthy in any relationship. She got quiet and defensive, saying he just cares about her safety. I didn't push harder because I could hear Sophia's earlier warning in my head about not ambushing Eliana with too much at once. Before the call ended, I told Eliana she should think about taking space from both me and Jimbo to figure out what she actually wants without either of us in her ear. The suggestion came out before I fully thought it through. She was silent for so long I thought the call dropped. Finally, she said she would think about it, and her voice sounded less certain than before. Hanging up felt like letting go of any chance we would ever get back together, but her well-being mattered more than my need to fix things. Sophia stayed on the line after Eliana disconnected and told me I did good, keeping calm and not making it about me. That night, Mom forwarded me a text from Jimbo claiming I threatened him and showed up at his place trying to start a fight. The lie was so detailed and specific it was almost impressive. I didn't waste time arguing or explaining. I just sent Mom the saved voicemail of Jimbo's actual threats from a few nights ago, with a short message saying, "This is what really happened." No extra commentary or demands for her to pick sides. Just the evidence speaking for itself. 2 days passed before Mom called asking to talk privately. Her voice sounded different over the phone, less sure of herself than usual. She admitted she didn't know about the voicemail, and it didn't sound like something Jimbo would do. I could hear her struggling with the information. I didn't pile on or demand she apologize for believing him first. I just said I was glad she was willing to hear my side of things. The conversation stayed short, and I let her process without pushing for more. We met for coffee 3 days later at a place halfway between our houses. Mom looked older somehow sitting across from me in the bright afternoon light. She admitted she's always been easier on Jimbo and harder on me, but got defensive when I asked why. She talked about family image and not wanting people to think she raised a son who manipulates women. The partial responsibility was frustrating because she still couldn't fully own her favoritism. But it was also more honest than she'd ever been with me. I thanked her for meeting and left it there without demanding more than she could give. The next morning, I drove to the apartment building and returned the keys to the landlord in person. He had paperwork ready to finalize ending the lease early, and I signed everything without reading it too carefully. Handing over the keys felt like actual closure on that whole chapter. The apartment held too many bad memories of Eliana's breakdown and Jimbo's manipulation. Walking away from it was easier than I expected. Later that week, Sophia passed along a message that Eliana booked an appointment with a therapist who specializes in relationship problems and wants space from both brothers while she works on herself. I felt relieved she was getting real help and resigned that I wasn't part of her healing process. The mixed emotions sat uncomfortable in my chest, but they felt honest. At least she was choosing herself, instead of letting either of us make decisions for her. A few days later, I was leaving work around 6 when I spotted Jimbo's car parked near mine in the back section of the lot. My stomach dropped, but I kept walking toward my car like I hadn't noticed him. He got out and started walking toward me fast, his face already angry before he said anything. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera app, hitting record and holding it at chest level so the lens pointed at him. He stopped about 3 feet away and shoved my shoulder hard enough that I stumbled back a step. I kept the phone steady and didn't say anything, just kept recording while he got in my face. He called me pathetic and said I was stalking Eliana by asking Sophia about her. I stayed quiet and let him talk, watching his face get redder as he realized I wasn't engaging. A woman walking to her car noticed us and stopped, asking if everything was okay over here. Jimbo backed up immediately and put his hands up like he was the reasonable one, saying we were just talking and everything was fine. I nodded at the woman and thanked her, still recording until Jimbo got back in his car and drove off. The whole thing lasted maybe 2 minutes, but I had it all on video, including the shove and the threats. The next morning, I went to the police station before work and asked to file a report about what happened. The officer at the desk explained I could file a non-criminal incident report that would create a paper trail without pressing charges. I showed him the parking lot video and played the voicemail from a few weeks ago where Jimbo threatened me. The officer watched both and took notes, asking questions about my relationship with Jimbo and whether this was part of an ongoing pattern. I explained the situation with Eliana and how Jimbo had been escalating his behavior over the past few months. The officer printed out the report and had me sign it, then gave me a copy for my records. He said this documentation would matter if things got worse, and I needed a restraining order later. I wasn't trying to get Jimbo arrested or start a legal battle, just protecting myself with proof of what was actually happening. Walking out of the station with that paperwork felt like finally having something concrete instead of just my word against his. That afternoon, Mom texted saying she wanted to set up a family, sit down to clear the air, and work things out. I read the message 3 times before responding that I would only come if Will could be there as a neutral support person. She took 2 hours to reply, asking why I needed to bring an outsider into family business. I explained that I needed someone there who wasn't already invested in protecting Jimbo, and if she wouldn't agree, then I couldn't attend. Another hour passed before she texted back saying fine. Will could come, and we could meet at the library conference room on Saturday afternoon. The nervousness hit me right away, but knowing Will would be there made the whole thing feel less like walking into an ambush. I texted Will asking if he'd come and he agreed immediately, saying he'd take notes if things got heated. Having backup felt like the first time in months I wasn't facing this alone. Saturday came, and I met Will in the library parking lot so we could walk in together. Mom was already in the conference room with Jimbo when we arrived, and her face tightened when she saw Will behind me. Jimbo started with his concerned brother routine, talking about how worried he's been about me and how he just wants our family to heal. His voice had that fake, gentle quality that made my skin crawl. Mom asked him to walk through the timeline of when he started spending time with Eliana, and I watched him carefully construct his answer to make it sound natural and supportive. But Mom kept pushing on specific details, asking when exactly he first offered to drive Eliana to appointments and how he knew her schedule. Jimbo's answers started contradicting each other, and his face changed when he realized Mom was actually questioning him instead of just accepting his version. Then he said something that made the whole room go quiet. He admitted he'd been waiting for the right moment with Eliana for years, ever since I first brought her home, and my appearance comment was finally the opportunity he needed to rescue her from me. The mask dropped completely in that moment, and Mom's face went pale. She looked at him like she was seeing someone she didn't recognize, asking what he meant by waiting for years. Jimbo tried to backtrack, but the damage was done, and Will was writing everything down in his phone. I took a breath and said clearly that I wanted no contact with Jimbo going forward. I told Mom she needed to stop sharing information between us or trying to get us to reconcile because that wasn't going to happen. Mom looked exhausted and older somehow, rubbing her temples while Jimbo tried to argue that I was overreacting. She held up her hand to stop him and said she would keep her relationships with us separate from now on, though her voice shook when she said it. It wasn't a perfect resolution or some big family healing moment, but it was something. Jimbo left first, slamming the conference room door hard enough that the librarian came over to check on us. Mom stayed sitting at the table looking defeated, and I didn't try to comfort her or make it easier. Will and I left together, and he said that went better than he expected, which made me realize how low my expectations had gotten. The following Tuesday, my manager called me into his office and said the company wanted to offer me a promotion to a different team. My first reaction was relief and excitement, but then he explained HR was delaying the start date by a month because of the formal warning still in my file from the work event. The mixed outcome stung, but also felt fair in a way I hadn't expected. I was moving forward, but my mistakes still had consequences that didn't just disappear. Will found me in the break room after and congratulated me, saying the delay wouldn't matter at all in 6 months. He was right, but it still felt like being punished even while getting rewarded. I signed the paperwork and went back to my desk, trying to focus on the fact that things were actually improving instead of dwelling on the setback. 2 days later, Sophia texted me with news about Eliana. She said Eliana announced she was moving temporarily to stay with a cousin in another city and specifically requested no contact from either brother while she focused on therapy. The boundary was clear and healthy, exactly what she needed, even though it meant accepting she was really gone. I read the message 5 times, feeling the finality settle in my chest. I texted back thanking Sophia for letting me know and asking her to tell Eliana I respected her decision completely. Sophia replied with a thumbs up and said she'd pass it along. The conversation ended there, and I sat on Will's couch staring at my phone, knowing this was probably the last update I'd get about Eliana for a long time. The closure felt clean, but also permanent in a way that made everything real. That weekend, I went to the storage unit where I'd been keeping Eliana's stuff and started going through everything. There was a box of her books, some kitchen items we'd bought together, and a folder of photos from better times. I packed it all carefully, making sure nothing would break in transit. I didn't include a note or any message asking her to reconsider, just her belongings organized and ready to return. I texted Sophia asking if she could coordinate getting everything to Eliana before she left town. Sophia said she'd arrange a pickup time and thanked me for being respectful about it. Letting go of the last physical connection to Eliana felt final in a way the other endings hadn't. These were the actual pieces of our life together, and giving them back meant accepting there was no version of the future where we'd need them again. The next week, I called Mara's office and scheduled weekly therapy sessions for the next 3 months, committing to the work instead of just showing up when things got bad. In our first regular session after that, Mara started helping me examine where my control issues actually came from. We traced patterns back to my family and how I learned to manage my own anxiety by trying to control how things looked on the outside. She asked about my childhood and how Mom treated me versus Jimbo, and I started seeing connections I'd never noticed before. The work was uncomfortable and slow, nothing like the quick fixes I'd been hoping for, but it felt necessary in a way I couldn't explain, like finally addressing the root problem instead of just managing symptoms. Mara gave me homework about noticing when I felt the urge to control situations and what was actually driving that need. I started keeping notes on my phone, and the patterns were embarrassing to see written out. By the end of that week, I went through my phone and blocked Jimbo on everything. Social media, phone number, email, all of it. Then I texted Mom saying I needed at least 6 months of space from family events to focus on my own healing. She called immediately, and I could hear the hurt in her voice when she asked if I was cutting her off completely. I explained I wasn't cutting her off, just taking a break from the family dynamic that had enabled so much damage. She was quiet for a long time before saying she understood, even though her voice said she didn't really. Will helped me start looking at apartments across town that same weekend, and we found a small 1-bedroom place that felt like a completely fresh start. Moving my stuff out of his spare room and into my own space felt like finally breaking free from all the old patterns. The apartment was plain and empty, but it was mine, and nobody from my old life knew the address. Mom texted saying she accepted my boundary, but hoped I'd reach out when I was ready. I didn't respond right away, because I needed to sit with the space I'd created without immediately filling it back up with family obligations. A few days later, Sophia texted saying Eliana started seeing a therapist who specializes in body image stuff and seems to be doing better with the work. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, wanting to ask how she's really doing, or if she ever mentions me. Instead, I just replied with a thumbs up and put my phone face down on the counter. The fact that I could feel happy she was getting help without needing to be part of it felt like actual progress, even if it hurt. Over the following weeks, Mom stopped calling me to share updates about Jimbo or asking me to pass messages to him through her. She started texting us separately about different things, having her own relationship with each of us instead of trying to manage both at once. There was no big family meeting where we all hugged and forgave each other, just a quiet shift where she was accepted we weren't going to be in the same room for a while. It felt realistic in a way that was kind of disappointing, but also worked better than forcing some fake reconciliation. She invited me to lunch without mentioning Jimbo, and we talked about normal stuff like her garden and my new job responsibilities. 3 months into my weekly therapy sessions and fully moved into my apartment across town, I was unpacking the last box when it hit me that I never actually got Eliana back, and that was never really what this was about. What I got instead was learning how to set boundaries without feeling guilty, taking real accountability for my mistakes instead of just saying sorry, and building a life that felt stable without needing everyone to see me a certain way. The growth felt hard to explain, and definitely wasn't the happy ending I'd imagined, but it was real. I still had days where I missed what we had, so much it made my chest tight. But Mara was teaching me to just sit with that feeling instead of immediately trying to fix it or push it away or convince myself I was over it. That's my side of the story, but it's way more fun when you add yours. What would you have done differently? Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading through them later. You always surprise me with your takes.